It feels as if MPs are kind of increasingly flexing their parliamentary muscles. Lots of talk about more amendments next week, potentially suspending the Article 50 process, trying to block no deal. Can you just explain what's happening? Do you think MPs will be able to take no deal off the table?
Well, I think you're right to say that what happens when you have a hung parliament is that power does pass from government, from the executive to parliament, and that's what we are seeing play out. I think there is a frustration in Parliament that we haven't had a chance until last Tuesday to vote on the draft agreement and then potentially on other options too. So the Prime Minister tomorrow is going to, as I understand it, make a statement but put down a motion which is going to say there'll be further debate about next steps on January the 29th. And it's that motion that can be amended. And there's a variety of different groups of MPs who will put motions down or amendments to that motion down. But I think it's very clear that there is no majority in Parliament for a no-deal outcome. And so that's going to be one of the critical things. I think it's important to sort of pull some of these things apart. So that's the first thing. And I'm working with a cross-party group of MPs, Yvette Cooper, Hilary Benn, but also Nick Bowles and Oliver Letwin in my own party, as well as Norman Lamb, to put down a piece of legislation. Because it is right that if you want to stop a no deal, stop the UK crashing out, sliding out on the 29th of March of this year, then the law does need to be changed. And so our very short bill will say that if the Prime Minister can't get an agreement approved by the House of Commons by the end of February, then the government will need to ask Brussels or to apply and to say we want to extend Article 50. We put in a suggested date, but of course all of this is debatable and amendable by the House of Commons. And then there are other MPs, other groups who will be seeking to do, we think, something similar. I haven't seen all those amendments or things that are going to be put down. But you're right, so there's that process. And then, of course, there's a process of how do you build a cross-party consensus towards an agreement that can get a majority in the House of Commons. And that's where ideas about whether it's Norway Plus or something else, as you say, around single market customs union, that's where that comes in.
I'm quite fascinated by the concept of all these MPs from different parties working together. I mean, how do you do it? How do you have those conversations? Is there a WhatsApp group?
I think, yes, WhatsApp has signed up a lot of MPs. I think what you've seen over the course of the last 2.5 years has been people working across party lines, often for the first time. So you know, Brexit started off as being pretty party political. It was down to the Conservative government that had granted the referendum. It was the Conservative government who were going to put in place a way of delivering on the result. But I think particularly after the 2017 general election, the result there, it became very clear that, of course, people were going to need to work cross-party lines in order to find an agreement. And it's interesting that many of us who are working cross-party are chairs of select committees, which always operate on a cross-party basis, try to operate by unanimity. So we have seen how cross-party working can provide positive results and a way forward. And so I think that's why you'll see, as I say, many of the chairs of select committees in that process. And actually, I think that Brexit shouldn't be a party political issue, because we've all got in our parties people who voted leave, people who voted remain. Many people represent constituencies where the results were pretty close, or they might have a particular view, but the constituency voted another way. And that's what I think all MPs are trying to find a way forward to get to a place where I think most people want there to be an agreement in place for leaving. But of course, there's a group of people in the House of Commons who don't want that to happen. They would like to have another vote across the country where Remain would be an option. That's not something that I agree with.
OK, we spoke a bit about the amendments that you're working on. I just want to really try and pin you down on the Dominic Grieve amendment that has caused a lot of concern, actually, among some MPs this morning. There's been quite a lot of debate about it. This idea that there could be legislation to suspend Article 50. Is that something that you would support?
Well, as I say, the bill that I put my name to does say that if the government can't get an agreement in place, then the minister would have to apply, to say to Brussels, right, we need to suspend Article 50 for a period of time so that we can build a consensus and get ourselves, more prepared for exit. And so that's something that I will be supporting.
Okay.
What I don't know is whether Dominic's amendment goes further than that, and there is talk obviously about whether, and I think Ken Clarke and others have said, well, perhaps Article 50 should be revoked. And you know, look, I'm a strong former Remain campaigner, but where I do agree with Dom Raab, and I heard part of his interview, is that I think people do want us to get on with this. I do think that actually we had a vote, and that actually it is important that the UK is going to leave the EU. We're going to leave the political institutions, but there are ways to do it in an orderly fashion to mitigate the economic damage, and that's what I'm interested in doing.
I mean, it feels as if Parliament is really trying to wrestle control of this process, almost as if there are two governments going on in Parliament at the minute. And some of the things that are being proposed, this idea, for example, that MPs could introduce motions that would take precedence over government business, for some people this will sound a bit like a coup. Is it?
Well, I think as other MPs have said, it's a strange sort of coup that starts with a whole bunch of democratically elected members of Parliament. And this is, I mean, it is unprecedented for backbenchers' business to take precedence over government business, but it is very much confined to one particular issue, Brexit. It's to my immense regret that, unfortunately, Brexit appears to be the only thing that we're able to discuss at the moment. Of course, it's important, but I think many people watching this are desperate for their politicians and government to talk about other issues. And frankly, I think the MPs are also very keen to talk about other issues, many of which you know are very challenging, many of which led to the Brexit result in 2016 anyway. So no, I think what this is MPs saying on this particular issue, we think there is a different way forward, and we particularly want to make sure there is not a no-deal outcome to Brexit. But the government will carry on, and government will carry on governing, and they'll have ministers in other departments doing other things. So no, I think to describe it as a coup is overblown.
We talked a lot about process. I'm keen to talk about the kind of Brexit that you are supporting, this idea of staying quite close to the single market, potentially in a customs union. Let's get real. There's no way the EU would allow that without the UK also accepting free movement of people. That is right, isn't it? Let's just admit it.
Well, I mean, look, that Common Market 2.0, which is the option that I am supporting, if you would be part of EFTA, part of the single market, then yes, freedom of movement comes with that. But there are mechanisms and there are ways to apply for there to be control. And actually, I think that the British public have got a far more nuanced understanding and interest in immigration than
Theresa May read it wrong, then?
Credit for.
Has Theresa May read it wrong?
I think that the Prime Minister... Well, I think the Prime Minister, given her Home Secretary background, has always said that freedom of movement is important, it's what people want. There's no doubt some people voted in 2016 to leave the EU because of concerns around immigration. But there are lots and lots of controls on immigration, who's coming here, how long they're coming here for, why they're coming here, that actually UK governments over the years could have exercised much, much more than they chose to. And actually, Sajid Javid's plans on immigration begin to take the UK in that direction. If you go to the EU countries, as someone who's going to live there for, 6 months, a couple of years, whatever, people have to register, they have to tell the local, whether it's police forces or others, that they're there and everything else. We don't do nearly enough of that in the UK. And that's the feedback that I get from my constituents. Okay. It's about control, it's about knowing who's here. It's not about saying, we don't want people from overseas to come and work in our NHS or work in our university. I'm sitting here in Loughborough, big international university, big manufacturers nearby who rely on people coming, bringing their talents from overseas, paying taxes here. That's not, I think, that's something that people say we must stop all of that, but people do want there to be control. We could have that control, but we could still be part of this Common Market 2.0 arrangement.
Now, this week, Theresa May suffered a historic defeat, the worst that any sitting government has ever experienced. Quite astonishing, really. And yet, unless I've missed something, she doesn't seem to have given any ground at all when it comes to her plans for Brexit. Are you worried that the Prime Minister isn't listening?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is listening. I was one of the MPs who went to see her on Thursday, and there were meetings held with Conservative MPs, opposition MPs. I think the Prime Minister I think the government is in an incredibly difficult position. I voted the Prime Minister's agreement on Tuesday, and I am stunned by people who have often friends of mine, who've campaigned for decades to get the UK out of the EU, who then didn't vote for the agreement on Tuesday. But we are where we are. I think trying to find a way forward, whether it is finding a cross-party consensus in Parliament, whether it is seeing whether the EU is able to give any more ground, which seems unlikely, but look, I'm not privy to those negotiations. It's a very difficult decision for the Prime Minister to make. We're going to find out more, I think, this week and certainly next week about the Prime Minister's Plan B. And then I think we'll all have to make decisions as MPs about what's in national interest, because ultimately what people really want is stability and certainty to know where they're going to go, what's going to happen on the 29th of March.
You haven't always had the easiest relationship with Theresa May. I think one of the first acts she did when she became Prime Minister was to sack you, and yet you have actually been one of the few MPs to stand up in the House of Commons and support some of what she's been trying to do. Do you think Theresa May has suffered from a failure to make enough friends when she was all-powerful, because now is a time when she really needs them?
Well, look, I think perhaps that's there is a fair point in there. But equally, I think that however many friends a Prime Minister has, when people have a difficulty with something that any Prime Minister is proposing, unfortunately, friendship doesn't always count, and people will go with what they think is right in the national interest. And I've no doubt that that's how MPs are voting. But ultimately, I think also we need to have a consensus. We need to move forward. Again, I think Dom made a point about moving forward after March. That is important. And I hope that the Prime Minister, actually, when I've seen her, she has been open to discussion, she's open to explain the deal and everything else. But there's a lot more talking that is going to be needed to get this over the line.